Well, so much for October 25th. Starting around midnight Eastern time on Friday the 21st, FromSoft rolled out the new patch for the DLC across PC, PS4, and Xbox One. But it looks like something got lost in translation because Xbox also got the DLC for any of the Season Pass owners. Being the extremely patient person that I am, I immediately bought the Season Pass for Xbox and promptly dove right in. After completing the DLC, I'd like to give my thoughts on the bosses in the DLC as a whole, so let me be clear here saying, spoiler alert! I will be spoiling the entire DLC, so please bookmark this video for later if you want to avoid spoilers. Also, I took the footage here from my stream, so please excuse the webcam that might appear from time to time in the top right corner. With that said, let's jump right in. We'll start with the optional boss of the DLC, the Champion's Gravetender. I'm gonna be frank, when I first started this fight, I was dumbfounded. I knew there had to be something more than just 3 wolves, which for the record are essentially reskinned dogs, and you know how much I love dogs, and a guy that boils down to the quality of an NPC invader. Fortunately, there is a second portion to the fight. When you get the Gravetender to half health, his Great Wolf joins the fray and it's a much more imposing foe. Initial impressions might have you comparing the wolf to Sif, but it reminds me more of a hybrid of the Royal Rat Vanguard and Watchdogs of the Old Lords in terms of moveset. Another easy comparison are the Sullivan's Beasts in the game. Now, this would have been an awesome intro and a neat wrinkle to the fight, but there's one big problem that I have. No more than 5 minutes into the fucking DLC, I fought this wolf in the regular area. Maybe this is intended to introduce you to it because it actually leaves the fight at half health, but my issue is this already gives you the chance to be introduced to the moveset before the boss fight even begins. So you've got 3 reskinned dogs, a reskinned Sullivan's Beast, and a glorified NPC invader. Let's just call it what it is. This boss completely feels like a throwaway along the lines of what is offered far too often in Dark Souls 2. With that said, I still enjoy the fight somewhat. A PvE fight in the style of PvP is certainly interesting, and the wolf is still fun to fight despite its similarities to other bosses in the series. Moving on to boss number 2, we've got Sister Freed. In a big, twist? I'll be honest, this chick didn't seem friendly to you from the start of the DLC, so I wasn't really surprised at the turn, but it was still kinda neat. Anyway, she takes up arms against you and you duke it out in a duel that is painfully reminiscent of Lady Maria from Bloodborne. Just like the other homage in the game to that fight, the Abyss Watcher, she has a pretty low health pool. But once you take her down, her father Lloyd gets pissed. And in all of his rampaging, he manages to breathe new life into Freed. Now the fight becomes a balancing act between the slow-moving but devastating Lloyd and the nimble and deadly Freed. Reminiscent of something else? Yeah, it's kinda hard not to see, but the fight does enough to set itself apart that I'd still consider it more inspiration than anything else. If you've watched a lot of my boss videos, you know I've said often that FromSoft has tried and failed to emulate the ONS experience, and I'm gonna be completely honest here. I think this may have been the closest they've come so far. The tension in the fight is excellent, the lead up is totally badass, and it offers just the right amount of fair challenge. One thing to note is that the 2 bosses share a health bar, so you have the option of attacking either to end the encounter, which offers some interesting variety and strategy. And of course, all's not over once the 2 have fallen. Summoning the strength of her fallen father, Freed makes one final stand. I'll say this, the first phase of this fight is pretty easy. On my second attempt, I was even able to get through it only being hit twice. The second phase is certainly challenging, but if you're familiar with how to handle a FromSoft gank boss, you're not gonna find much trouble. But this phase, get ready for the difficulty to get turned up a ton. Unquestionably the most challenging portion of the fight, Freed gains magic she can shoot at you, combos that make you question if StaminaBar.exe is failing, and she jumps so damn fast out of your narrow attack windows you'll find it difficult to outlast her. And what should be becoming apparent is that this boss is the epitome of an endurance fight. You have an easy opening, a challenging middle, and a punishing end. Managing your S's throughout the first 2 phases is key because if you struggle like I did, you'll be needing every last bit of it in the 3rd phase. With that said, I did manage to beat this boss on my second attempt in New Game Plus, but I think it's fair to mention that I used the very strong speedrun build for my run so I can get an idea of how well it would perform. And FromSoft didn't really learn from the vanilla boss's weakness to bleed because all the DLC's bosses are incredibly weak to it. In conclusion though, I think Sister Freed is a damn excellent fight. Sure, it borrows a lot from the previous entries in the series, but I think it does all those homages with good form and offers enough unique flavor to feel massively rewarding. So for starters, when talking about the DLC as a whole, let me make one thing clear. This DLC is very much the same as the main game was. It doesn't do a whole lot new and it takes a ton of inspiration from the other games. Whether you consider this positive fan service, an annoyance, laziness in game design, or the developer simply leaning on their strengths is up to you. The second thing to discuss is breadth of content. All in all, this DLC took me about 2 hours to complete in its entirety. I explored every area as much as I possibly could, took the time to read item descriptions, and even had 3 deaths throughout the playthrough, but it was still that short. And when talking about bang for your buck, this is obviously something that may concern you. I'll say this, from a PvE only perspective, I feel just ever so slightly underwhelmed, more so because I wish there were more bosses. The actual area areas themselves are pretty damn well done, offer some unique foes to challenge you, and actually feel somewhat non-linear in comparison to the main game. But yeah, when there's only 2 bosses and one of them is essentially a collection of the game's normal enemies, prowling Magus, it's a bit disappointing. Okay, relax, it's not that bad. The other boss, on the other hand, is so damn good I would argue it's almost worth the price of admission alone. To give you an idea where the bosses would rank on my personal list, I would say the Gravetender and his wolf would likely find themselves somewhere in the 80th to 90th best range, but I think Sister Fried quite honestly may have earned herself a spot in the top 10 and unquestionably a spot in the top 20. If you're a PvE player that loves Dark Souls 3, then you're gonna love this expansion. You may just find that it's slightly bittersweet. Now let's talk briefly about the PvP. I'll disclaim that due to this oddly timed launch, the online portion of the game was unavailable, but the Gravetender gives you access to an item that'll allow you to matchmake for PvP via the bonfire and Firelink Shrine. That's extremely cool, and one of the biggest complaints of the game is the gang-centric duels and invasion. The new weapons are also really cool and offer some very unique weapon arts that'll be fun to build around. So if you're into both PvE and PvP, I think the expansion is undoubtedly worth the cost. But ultimately, that's all for you to decide. I hope you enjoyed my take on the bosses of the DLC and my brief thoughts on the expansion as a whole. If you haven't already seen it, be sure to click the annotation coming up at the end for my series ranking the entire roster of bosses in Blood Souls. And if you're as excited as I am about speedruns including Ashes of Ariandel, be sure to check me out on Twitch. Thank you all for watching, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.